After covering the origins of Seiyu units, learning how far they've come since the 70s, the innovations in the 80s and 90s, the boom of Seiyu units in the noughties, and the creative vein of some Seiyu units in the early 10s, it's time to dive deep into the 5th generation of Seiyu units, one plagued by lack of interest by Seiyu fans. Let's kick off this episode of Seiyu Lounge. Welcome to Seiyu Lounge, I am your host Vanessa, and today's topic is the 5th generation of Seiyu units, 2015-2018, the Decadence. As exciting as Seiyu units had been up until 2015, truth is that the Seiyu and music industries started to shift their focus. And that's how Seiyu units went through 4 weird years in which, despite the quality that those boasted, barely anyone was interested in them. How was the music panorama for Seiyu units in the late 10s? 2015 was the year in which there was a boom of 2D music projects. Over 10 different 2D music projects were announced, many of those bringing to their ranks rising stars and unknown talents among Seiyu. Others went all out and brought in popular Seiyu with proven singing skills, either from their previous work as part of Seiyu units or as solo artists. There was plenty of music to check, many groups to get to know, and plenty of new Seiyu talents taking their first steps in the music industry. Fans of Seiyu were loving every minute of it. With everyone fixated on the novelty of exclusively 2D music projects or 2D music projects with rhythm game tie-ups, Seiyu units started to take the backseat until they turned into a niche. So while the music and Seiyu industries were all around their shiny new concept, Seiyu units were put aside, losing importance for Seiyu that found in 2D units a fast way to get the exposure they needed, in case they were rookies or rising stars, or give them a second shot of popularity as they saw their careers slowly fading away in importance. In this generation there were fewer Seiyu units debuting, but those that did, against all odds, have managed to impress with their passion and quality. However, those ended up eclipsed by a new solo artist boom, one that took the biggest rising stars among male Seiyu to a bigger stage. All of a sudden, being in a Seiyu unit was considered tacky and not at all exciting. Everyone wanted to become a solo artist. 2D music projects shifted the fans' focus away from Seiyu units. Solo artists arrived to finish the job. And thus, Seiyu units started to be the bastard child in the Seiyu industry, with very few people caring about those. Something that has led to poor sales, hiatuses, and disbandments aplenty. Which music genres were prominent? From 2015 up until 2018, pop and rock were prominent. EDM was still there, but it ended up being a music genre closely connected to 2D music more so than Seiyu unit music. Jazz appeared by the hands of indie Seiyu units, still connected to radio shows. And rock got a little bit heavier now that there was no pressure to impress. Influences. Well, as far as influences go, there were of course 2D music projects, plenty of those pop music driven. Seiyu solo artists, most of those pop artists, and previously successful Seiyu unit endeavors, those of course with units performing a wide variety of music genres. In a way, this was the generation that was in the middle of it all, a result of all the innovation that had taken place in the last 40 years, as well as real-time experimentation. Drastic changes were happening to the music and Seiyu industries in this generation. and the units had to adapt quickly to trends, visuals and sonorities unless they wanted to be completely forgotten. It is worth mentioning that most music from this generation was very much in line with what was popular in Japan, more so than overseas, which is an interesting twist in comparison with the previous generations that followed international trends as well. Music quality. One thing I find odd about this generation is that the music quality was a little bit all over the place. While there were plenty of seiyuu units debuting, very few can actually be called good seiyuu units. The lack of focus was obvious for most seiyuu units in this generation, constantly adapting to trends that changed almost monthly. Lineups changed for groups, a result of seiyuu realizing that they were not cut out for singing or live performances. As a result of all that instability, the music quality shifted from a really high professional level to an amateur level, or even if on a high level, with really sloppy editing and mixing. A serious offender when it comes to sloppy editing and mixing is Marine Entertainment, which, although it was once the household of many amazing seiyuu units, DAT, Elekita Round Zero, MOE and more, it turned into a relic of the past in this generation. It was a music label determined on continuing to support seiyuu units stemming from radio shows, but the effort put into the quality of the music by their new seiyuu units, or even the care to support them, left a lot to be desired. But not everything was bad. Without much pressure to match the milestones that previous generations had, seiyuu units from this generation were free to create the music they wanted. And that freedom gave way to some really good music, with recordings and production on a genuinely good level. There were seiyuu units that accepted the challenge and produced their own music. There were units that, although signed to Marine Entertainment, still made, and in some cases still make, an impact. Those do have a lot of quality and have, against all odds, thrived in a music industry less and less welcoming of seiyuu units. Stemming from radio, anime, music projects, or TV shows. Seiyuu units were primarily stemming from radio shows. Actually, about 90% of the seiyuu units that debuted in this generation were tied to a radio show. Seiyuu units stemming from anime were rare, I dare say barely existent. 2D music projects were really big and gave way to many units, however, most didn't ever get a 3D presence, which is to say, promote and perform live as the unit and its characters. Either way, I'm not going to cover 2D units in this episode. This is all about seiyuu units, and those stemmed primarily from radio shows. Now ask yourself, do I listen to seiyuu radio shows? Most of you will answer that you don't. Perhaps because you're not comfortable with the Japanese language. Perhaps because having access to seiyuu radio shows is really hard. Whichever the reason, most seiyuu fans, especially those internationally, don't listen to seiyuu radio shows, so to come across those seiyuu units, you're either extremely lucky to come across them, or you're actively looking for things your favorite seiyuu is doing and come across the seiyuu unit they are a part of. Units that marked this generation. There are very few units that marked this generation. For this episode I bring you 2 seiyuu units with interesting concepts or a weird path, and 2 seiyuu units that will show you that you should be following them because of their sheer raw quality. And 6A Lin. Debuted in 2016, and 6A Lin was a seiyuu unit with an interesting concept. It wasn't necessarily a novelty, but the seiyuu unit was comprised of only with-line seiyuu talents. In 2013, SOF5, the first seiyuu unit comprised of only seiyuu talents, in this case 81 produces, had made its debut. However, N6ALIN had a contrived career that is worth checking out for how eerily similar it was to an idol group career. The Seiyu unit originally consisted of Shunichi Toki, Yoshitaka Yamaya, Tatsuya Tokutake, Takehide Ishii, Takeru Kikuchi, and Yusuke Miyamoto kicked off its career with a bubbly pop sound. In 2017, N6ALIN changed its concept for a more serious and intense idol-like style for its second single, Lived Alive. Soon after, the Seiyu unit announced Yusuke Miyamoto's departure from the group, and the first hiccups started to be noticeable. The quality of their music wasn't necessarily improving, and despite the group having a solid core with Shunichi Toki and Yoshitaka Yamaya, they were the only ones actually sounding good. The group changed yet again its concept for its third single, Part of Me, released in 2019. After bubbly pop, intense idol-like pop, the group now had a softer sound, with ballads and mature dance tunes taking over. And Tatsuya Tokutake dropped another bomb. He was to retire from the Seiyu industry by the end of the year, also announcing his departure from N6ALIN. Still in the same year, N6ALIN announced its disbandment. This was a roller coaster of a career for Seiyu unit stemming from a radio show. They held 2 live shows, released 3 singles and 1 full-length album. 2 out of the 6 original members left the group. In 3 years, the unit changed concepts 2 times. The group took too many blows until it couldn't, with disbandment being the only outcome. U-Make. In 2017, and also stemming from a radio show, U-Make debuted. Now this is a unique Seiyu unit. For starters, U-Make is signed to Artsonic, a minor music label, giving the group an indie-like status. Less budget, but also more freedom, led to the unit to create their music how they want it. Yes, the unit quickly started to showcase its talents by composing and writing their own songs. U-Make is a self-producing Seiyu unit consisting of Kent Ito, in charge of singing and composition, and Yoshiki Nakajima, in charge of singing and lyrics. This is a refreshing concept, albeit not something groundbreaking. Remember the 70s? U-Make refreshed slapstick's concept and format, adding self-producing to it. And remember the third generation, the early 10s? U-Make approached music composition in a way that all members get to shine and showcase their unique colors, much like what Elec It Around Zero did. U-Make's first full-length album, Tripper, featured solo songs by Ito and Nakajima, leading to a fascinating set of performances. On top of it all, U-Make used to have a simplistic pop-rock sound that more recently evolved into a mature sound, bringing funk, dance and jazz music to the spotlight. It's quite impressive how much quality U-Make has. The music doesn't feel nor sound generic, only a couple of exceptions to these. The lyrics are interesting and with some depth. Kent Ito and Yoshiki Nakajima's vocals are outstanding, with both easily among the best singers in the Seiyu industry. The sheer technique and quality both bring to each performance stands out, and even if the Seiyu unit is not that popular, U-Make shows that if Seiyu want to, they can create a genuinely high-quality project. U-Make shows time and time again that there are still quality Seiyu units out there, and that this generation has a lot to offer. Hyoroto Danshi, another Seiyu unit stemming from a radio show. Hyoroto Danshi debuted in 2018, signed to the major music label Lantis. The Seiyu unit consists of Kotaro Nishiyama and Yuichiro Umehara. Now, why do I bring this unit to the spotlight? Well, it certainly isn't for how innovative their music is. Hyoroto Danshi's music is pretty generic pop, with some rock in the mix, perfect for intros and outros of a radio show. The main reason I brought Hyouro Todanshi to the spotlight is because they scored a major music label deal and stem from a radio show. Before them, only Pharaoh Man had a contract signed to a major music label. And the Seiyu duo, stemming from a radio show and releasing music, gives off Hiroshi Kamiya and Daisuke Ono's vibes. Of course, I'm not comparing this unit with the others I've mentioned, but I see some similarities in its path with those Seiyu units and see the potential for them to actually go on a path like Hiroshi Kamiya and Daisuke Ono due to the longevity of their radio show. So more than impressing with their sound and performances, Hyouro Todanshi winks at the third generation of Seiyu units, something that I find interesting as now Seiyu units are not viewed as exciting or worth following. Had the unit made its debut a couple of years earlier, and maybe you and I could have been talking about how impressive Hyouro Todanshi's path in the music industry was. Kashikomi. And to wrap up this episode is Kashikomi, Seiyu unit that alongside Yumake in this generation and Sparklu in the 6th generation is one of the most exciting Seiyu units out there. Kashikomi debuted in 2018, stemming from a radio show. The lineup is quite interesting, teaming up two initially somewhat known Seiyu, mostly because of their work in the Idolmaster Side M franchise as members of High Joker. But outside of that niche, the unit's vocals, Shoya Chiba and Shonogami, were not even known, at least when the unit debuted. Bold gamble here by Marin Entertainment. But that was the extent of how much the label has risked with them. Since its debut, promotions for Kashikomi have been like with any other Seiyu unit signed to Marin Entertainment. Very little investment in marketing, sharing previews of the songs after the CD was released instead of prior, not even sharing CDs' cover art, and so on. And do you know what is the most frustrating about it all? Kashikomi is a genuinely talented Seiyu unit. In my opinion, the best Seiyu unit out there. Heavy rock music, beautiful ballads and funky tunes serve as the stage for Shoya Chiba and Shonogami to showcase how unbelievably talented they are as singers. Kashikomi reminds me a lot of Elekita Round Zero, and at times there are flashes of that sound in Kashikomi's music, but with that theatricality toned down, giving way for deeply emotional performances that move the listener. Additionally, their quality and versatility on the vocal end are still something that impresses me with each CD they release. Since its debut, Kashikomi has released 3 singles and 2 mini-albums and held a fan event. And despite not being popular, Kashikomi releases day in, day out, outstanding performances on top of its robust rock sound, unique vibe, and performances that will make you beg for more. This is the true, underrated diamond from the 5th generation. The Seiyu and music industries and, in a way, fans were unforgiving for this generation. Despite the obvious Seiyu units that don't add much quality or innovation to the Seiyu unit formula, there were outstanding Seiyu units debuting in this generation. Of course, both Seiyu units that I praised quite a lot in this episode are performing rock music, a music genre that is not that appreciated among Seiyu fans. And then, these awesome Seiyu units stem from radio shows that very few people have access to. Then, there are music labels in charge of promoting some of these units that don't even bother with the basics to promote them well and bring some attention to their music. When you look closer to this generation, you notice the indifference, a lack of passion or interest by Seiyu fans and music labels about Seiyu units. And it is daunting, especially when there are unbelievably good talents among the sea of generic Seiyu units. So tell me, what do you think about this generation of Seiyu units? Are you familiar with or a fan of any of these Seiyu units? Let me know in the comments on YouTube. And remember, leave your comments as complex or as simple as they may be, and you can be featured on upcoming episodes of Seiyu Lounge. If you enjoyed this episode and don't want to miss the Hand That Feeds HQ's weekly male Seiyu and music related content, hit the subscribe button. I'll return next week with another episode of Seiyu Lounge. Thank you for listening and see you guys around.